We worked to clean out corruption. I signed the first ever tax cuts in the history of my state. In 160 years, they've never had any broad-based tax cuts. We streamlined government services. We reformed education, something that the Clintons had never been able to get done. We transformed our healthcare system to make it prevention-based rather than waiting until people were catastrophically ill. We passed strong laws that said that we will protect unborn children. We passed a constitutional amendment. That made it the official policy of Arkansas to be pro-life from the time of conception until the time of natural death, and then passed 11 different pieces of pro-life legislation, something that had never been able to get through in our legislature ever before, becoming the most pro-life state in the country in terms of our legislative processes. And I want you to know, for some people, that's a political issue. For me, it is a deeply principled moral issue. And I believe this, that it's important that you have at least one candidate in this race who still believes in human life and because I believe those of us who believe that the human life issue is a cornerstone issue of our culture. We need a voice in this election process. I'm staying in because since I'm the only one who's still talking about it, the only one who still believes that it's wrong to create and then destroy human embryos for the sake of medical research. I also believe that we need at least one voice that says our current tax system is completely wrong. I was visiting with a man in Manchester, New Hampshire, a few months ago. He worked in a machine shop, and he worked 2 shifts. He said, I'm working 2 shifts because my daughter's in grad school at Cornell. Grad school at Cornell is costing him $54,000 a year. Yeah, my first thought was, thank you, Lord, that my daughter doesn't want to go to grad school. And then he said, you know what's happening? Because I'm working the 2nd shift, doubling my time at work, I'm in another tax bracket. And that's meaning that the federal government is now taking more out of my 2nd shift than they took out of my 1st shift, and that was bad enough. And he said, it just doesn't seem fair to me that I'm working twice as hard, but I'm not making twice as much money because the tax system actually penalizes me for working harder. And I said, well, sir, it gets worse, because if you save that money, we tax the savings. If you invest in the stock market, we tax the investments on dividends. And by the way, if you buy and sell something, we tax the capital gains. And oh, by the way, if you die, we'll get you one more time before we let you go. Now, folks, it is counterintuitive to a decent economic system to penalize productivity. But by the way, the worst of it is that we'll subsidize irresponsibility, because the one way he can get some help for his daughter from the federal government is if he just would quit both shifts, just sit at home and watch TV and check the ESPN games out, then she would qualify for some federal assistance. Now, does anybody in this room want to look me in the eye and tell me it makes sense to say, the harder you work, the more the government takes out of you. But if you don't work at all, we will subsidize you and give you enough benefits to prop you up. Now, folks, it's no small wonder that we're having a tough time competing with the Chinese and Mexico and other countries, because we have a tax system that is choking the daylights out of the hard-working. Get rid of the current tax code with its 66,000 pages of nonsense and change it for something like the common sense of a tax system, simple enough that a 7-year-old running a lemonade stand will understand it. Then something dynamic would happen in the economy. The things that we manufacture here in this country, we can manufacture on a level playing field with those things that are being imported. I want to tell you why we've got to continue to manufacture in this country. There are 3 things that give us strength as a country, 3 things we have to be able to do to be free. And I'm staying in this race because I don't hear anybody else saying this. First thing, country's got to be able to feed itself. I see your sign right here that says America's Dairyland. And I'm going to tell you, you're an agricultural state, and I come from one. Between a fourth and a third of our entire economy in Arkansas is agriculture. I understand something about the value of having it so that our families only pay 9% of their family budget to put food on the table. And the reason that becomes so important is because that means we have a more diverse economy since we have more discretionary income to spend on other things. The country that cannot feed itself is only as free as is the country feeding it is willing for it to be. I don't ever want this country to take on fair and free. It was pretty shocking a few years ago. There was a study. This is a true thing. A study was done to find out what kids in New York City thought about agriculture, and they asked the question, where does milk come from? True. I'm not making this up, as Dave Berry said. They asked kids, where does milk come from? And the kid's answer was, the store. They had no idea that a cow was involved in getting the milk to their table. A lot of Americans do not understand how agriculture helps us to be free. The country's got to feed itself. Secondly, the country's got to be able to fuel itself. We are right now at the mercy of a lot of the oil merchants of the Middle East because we have become enslaved to their oil, which means they set the prices, they affect our environment, our economy, and our national security. I propose that as president we will become energy independent within 10 years, and we'll tell the Saudis to keep their oil because we won't be importing any more of their oil than we are importing their stamp. Ships and airplanes and tanks and armored vehicles. You know what worries me most about the loss of 2 million manufacturing jobs in this country? Yes, it's the loss of the jobs and eroding middle class, and the fact that once were the jobs that kept us where we had a chance to move up the economic ladder. Now those jobs are disappearing. But I'll tell you what we're outsourcing that's just as scary as outsourcing our jobs. We're outsourcing our freedom. Because if somebody else builds for us the weapons with which we defend ourselves, the day they don't want us to defend our freedom, we don't have any freedom. And we can never allow this country to lose the capacity to Speaking of our freedom, I don't hear any other person running for president who has a clue about the value of some other way that we defend our freedom. And that's by having respect for the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And a lot of times when politicians are asked about the Second Amendment, they'll say, oh yes, I support hunters. Let me tell you something. When a person is asked about the Second Amendment, they start talking about hunting. They just told me two things. First, they're probably not real hunters. But secondly, they don't have a clue what the Second Amendment is about. Look, I'm a hunter. I look into places like this because I can see where white-tailed deer might be somewhere. We hunt turkey, hunt, deer hunt. We also hunt other things, you know, like armadillo. We call this in Arkansas possum on the half shell. But look, I'm going to tell you something. The Second Amendment is not about hunting. It's about freedom. It's about being able to protect ourselves, our families, and our property. And there's a real threat to our Second Amendment rights. Interestingly enough, I don't hear anybody want to infringe upon the First Amendment rights. A lot of people want to infringe upon the Second. Well, we better have a president who understands that the reason our founding fathers insisted that that be a part of the Bill of Rights is because they knew that the last line against tyranny is ultimately a citizen who can defend himself against somebody trying to threaten his freedom.